What is going on, guys? ESG here, back with a new FPL video. Game week 4 is upon us and my wildcard is active. So in today's video, I'm going to be going through my wildcard team for game week 4, and then looking at a little bit of an alternative wildcard, which does allow you to move to other players later on down the line. As always, if you do enjoy the video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you are new. And with that being said, let's get into it. So starting off with the goalkeeper and the defence, and honestly, this is the hardest part of any early wildcard team, trying to find the best goalkeeper and defenders to go for that can last you for the next 16, 17 weeks, because you don't get another wildcard until around game week 20, and even then you don't want to be wildcarding in game week 20. You're looking at maybe game week 26, 27 before you actually want to wildcard again, so that's a long time to go with only having 3 transfers. So this defence I have gone for, I do like, but I do feel like there are improvements that could be made. So starting off in net, I've gone for Fleck, and now the next 2 game weeks for Brentford are not great. They've got Man City away and Spurs away. The reason that I've gone for Flecken is from game week 6 onwards, when the fixtures get really nice for Brentford, and I can see maybe not clean sheets in them games, but quite a few save points. So that's the only reason I've gone for Flecken. I could have gone for Raya for 5.5 million, but the same again. Game week 4 and 5, really bad fixtures, and then game week 6 onwards is when they get really nice. And no goalkeepers other than Alisson really have great fixtures for game week 4 and 5. So the goalkeeper position is the tricky one. I could have gone for a Brighton goalkeeper, but I'm not too sure which the number 1 would be. A lot of people are saying Verbruggen, but I'm not fully convinced by that. So I've gone with Flecken just for game week 6 onwards, in all reality. I can't see a clean sheet in game week 4, can't see a clean sheet in game week 5. It's game week 6 onwards that I want him for. So I'm just going to take the hit there in net and know that I'm probably not going to get a clean sheet for the next 2, but maybe he can get a few save points and save me a little bit, but I'm not too bothered if he doesn't. Moving down to the actual defence, and I think it's really nice, but I would like a Villa defender, and I've got Dunkler at the minute. I did have Konza, but with Konza going off injured yesterday in that England game, I am thinking more, is Konza going to be worth it? I could have gone for Pau Torres, but again, attacking threat isn't there, and Dunk doesn't really have an attacking threat either, so I could switch to a Villa defender, and Dunk's not set in stone, but I just feel like Brighton's next 2 fixtures against Ipswich, and I'm not too sure who they're against in game week 5. It might be Nottingham Forest, but that might be wrong. But Brighton's next 2 fixtures are really favourable and really nice, and I can probably see a clean sheet in both of them. And I would like a little bit of that Brighton defence in there, which is why I have gone for Dunk. And even from corners, Dunk is getting forward and into the box, so there is the potential of a goal from him. But I'm not overly bothered if he doesn't. He's mainly there for the clean sheet over the next 2, and then I would maybe look at moving him on in game week 6 when the fixtures get a little bit more tricky for Brighton. So I've got Dunk there for now. It could be a Villa defender. It could really be any 4.5 million defender, but I always feel like Dunk over the next 2 is the one to keep an eye on, just because of how nice those 2 fixtures are. Moving on to the other 2 defenders, and I've gone for 2 Liverpool defenders just because of how strong Liverpool's defence has been. I do want to triple up on Liverpool, and a bit of a spoiler alert, this is a Salah and Haaland draft. And I was between, do I double up on the Liverpool defence or double up on the Liverpool attack? And I feel like the Liverpool attack is just there's too many options to go for, and nobody really knows who week in, week out will play, especially with Champions League starting next week. I can see quite a bit of rotation there. So I feel like the 2 defenders that I have gone for, maybe not so Konate, but Trent definitely is almost guaranteed to be locked in. He is going to get the majority of minutes. I know he's been coming off in about the 70th minute, but that's still a good enough amount of time for him to get involved in the game. And one good thing with him coming off early is that clean sheet. If they have the clean sheet when he comes off, the clean sheet stays intact. And if they then concede after that, Trent's points won't be affected. So I'm happy enough going with Trent. I'm going to start off with Trent. I feel like Trent's attacking returns. I know that he's not had an attacking return yet, but they've been there. He could have had an assist or two in the first game week. In the third game week, he scored a goal which got ruled out, but then again, he could have got assists. And playing for England over the last two games, Trent has played really well, and he's actually got a couple of assists. So, so I'm really happy going with Trent. I think over the next 3, maybe 4 game weeks, Liverpool's fixtures are really nice, and I can see Trent getting returns in those games, and I feel like it's just a matter of when at the minute that he'll get an attacking return, not if, it'll be when, and I can see it being very soon, so I'm more than happy to keep Trent. Konate is the questionable one because over the last 2 game weeks, Konate's been playing really well at centre-back, but could Quansah make his way back into that starting 11? And I think he could, especially with Champions League starting. I think, will Konate be more favoured for the Champions League and then Quansah is more favoured for the Premier League? Potentially, yes, but I would like to see Konate still starting in the Premier League. And in all honesty, I can see it at the minute. I can see Konate being that number 2 next to Van Dijk. I can't see Quansah making his way back in that soon. I think Champions League football, Quansah might start, and then Konate starts in the Prem. I think that's probably a bit more realistic. And Konate's attacking threat has been more there than Van Dijk this season, which is why I've gone for Konate over Van Dijk. I could have gone for Robertson, but I can't afford him in this draft. In the next draft, I do have Robertson in there, and I will show that later on. But I think doubling up on that Liverpool defence, Konate isn't a bad shout to go for. He's a 5 million starter. I say starter in brackets. Is he going to be that starter? Nobody knows. And I feel like that's a risk that I am willing to take in this wildcard team. If Konate starts, then not only do you have the clean sheet potential, but also attacking return potentials. From corners, Konate has been the one getting to the ball more than Van Dijk. So I think out of both of them, Konate has a better chance of getting an attacking return. But again, it is just a risk going with Konate, not knowing if he will start every game. Looking at the bench, I've gone for Pedro Porro and Greaves. Now, Pedro Porro, I don't feel comfortable benching Porro again at 5.5, but against Arsenal, they've lost Odegaard, who, I don't know if anybody's seen it, but it looks like he's rolled his ankle and he could be out for a little while. So no Odegaard for Arsenal, no Declan Rice for Arsenal. So I could see Spurs maybe not winning the game, but getting a draw. And if it is going to be a 0-0 game or something like that, I would like to have Porro in there in my starting 11. But realistically, out of those other 3 defenders, who do I want to bench? The only one would probably be Dunk. And then if Brighton do keep a clean sheet and Spurs don't, I wouldn't be happy. So I have Porro there. I could end up removing Porro completely because looking over the next 4, 5, 6 game weeks, Porro probably wouldn't start for me in all honesty. I think other players have better fixtures, so Porro might be one that I do look at offloading before the deadline. And then Greaves as that 4 million. I'm not going to be removing Greaves. At 4 million, he's there to stay. I was needed a budget enabling defender in there, which is why I went for Greaves. So that is the entirety of the defence. I'm pretty set on that, but there are other options that I would like to go for. So now let's move on to the midfield, and you can see why I've gone a little bit cheaper in the defence. So now moving on to the midfield, and honestly, I think I'm very happy with this midfield 5. Maybe 1 or 2 changes to be made, but overall I'm happy. So starting off with Mo Salah. It's a Salah and Haaland draft, as I have said, and Salah is returned in every game so far, and him and Haaland are both level on points. I'm pretty sure they have 41 points each. So I think now is probably the best time to get both of them in. I've had Salah since the beginning, and I'm so happy that I haven't. Salah's not going anywhere anytime soon. The next 4 or 5 fixtures are really nice. They've got Nottingham Forest this week, Bournemouth next week, and Wolves the week after, and then I think they have Palace the week after that. So that's 4 really favourable fixtures, which means maybe I won't be having Saka in my team at any time soon, but I'm going to touch on that a little bit later on, especially with that Odegaard injury. I do think Arsenal's attack is a bit questionable now, but I will touch on that a little bit later on. But for now, sticking with Salah, returning in every game so far, and I can just see him getting even more returns. I think this week against Forest, he can get returns. And at the minute, I do have him there as my captain. That could easily be Haaland against Brentford. I'm not too decided yet on who my captain will be, but game week 5, Salah is definitely a captain shout. City have Arsenal, don't want Haaland captain in that. Liverpool at home against Bournemouth, 100% I want to captain Salah for that game. Then even the week after, when Liverpool have Wolves away, again, Salah's a really good captaincy shout. So for the next 3 or 4 game weeks, I think Salah is probably the best captaincy shout, and then it'll be Haaland a bit later on. But even then, Salah has some pretty nice fixtures, so I'm more than happy to stick with Salah in this wildcard team and get him in there as that premium asset. So no complaints there from me. Moving on to Eze next. Eze, I did have at the beginning of the season, and I transferred him out before game week 1, and I was glad I did until game week 3 when he got that return. So I was a little bit annoyed at that. However, Leicester at home this week, if I am with me wildcarding, I need to get Eze in for this game week. At home against Leicester, I can see him getting returns in that game. He's on set pieces. There's talk that he's on penalties. I'm not 100% sure on that, but other people are saying that he is on penalties, so he's a penalty taker as well. So I'm more than happy to have Eze in this team. And then probably in game week 7, when his fixtures get tricky, because they have Liverpool and a couple of other tough ones, that's when I might look at transferring him out for... I'm not too sure who for. It was originally going to be Mbermo, but as you can see, he is on my bench, and I will touch on him in a second. But I will look at transferring Eze out eventually. I'm just not sure who for. Maybe in game week 6, I'll look at transferring Eze out for somebody like a Martinelli or a Trossard to get some Arsenal coverage in there. And I would like to do that, especially not having Saka. So with Odegaard getting injured in the international break, I can probably see Havertz dropping back to be that number 10, which is why I feel like Havertz up front isn't going to be the best option in any teams at the minute. I think a lot of people have gone for Havertz ahead of game week 6, but if Odegaard's going to be out for a while and Havertz is going to be playing as that 10 role, I can personally see Trossard playing as the number 9. And with Trossard being the same price as Eze, from game week 6, I might look at bringing Trossard in for Eze. The only reason that I've not done it at the minute is, one, Eze's next 2 fixtures are pretty decent. They've got Leicester at home and then I think Man United away. Not the worst fixture. But then it also gives me 2 weeks to see how Arsenal are actually lining up, and then I can make a decision ahead of game week 6 for which Arsenal attacker or midfielder I do want to bring in. So that's the only reason that I've not gone for an Arsenal midfielder in there at the minute. Moving on to Minte next. I'd like a bit of coverage in the Brighton attack, and it was between Minte and Mitoma, and I just feel like Minte being cheaper and having a similar number of returns as Mitoma, Minte is the one to go for. So there's not really much to touch on. I could have gone for Semenyo from Bournemouth, but the next 2 fixtures aren't great, whereas Minte has 2 really nice fixtures, and then in game week 6, I can look at moving away from Minte and bringing Semenyo in then. So Minte for the next 2 is probably locked in for me, and then from game week 6 onwards, I might look at moving away, but I've got a lot of transfers lined up for game week 6 at the minute, so I will have to decide which ones I want to do, but Minte is definitely sticking for the next 2. And then looking at Rodgers, again, I wanted some Villa attack coverage, and Unai Emery seems to love Morgan Rodgers, so I'm more than happy to stick with Rodgers in my team. Is he going to return week in, week out? Absolutely not, and I don't think anybody's expecting him to. But there is that chance for him to get a goal, an assist, anything like that. A lot of people are saying, why don't you go for Onana instead? And this is what people are saying to other people, but Onana is a defensive midfielder who's been in the right place at the right time. Rodgers is closer to the goal. He's playing as more of a left winger, so Rodgers has more of an attacking threat than Onana does, which is why I've gone for Rodgers. If Rodgers picks up an injury, I can easily switch to Onana, but I'd just like to stick with Rodgers. A lot of people are going for Rodgers, so if Rodgers does return, then I'll get points and they will get points, so I'm not losing out on points. Whereas if I went for Onana and he didn't get points but Rodgers did, I'd be losing out on points then. So that's the only reason that I've gone for Rodgers. I needed a 5 million midfielder in there and some Villa attacking coverage, so Rodgers ticks all those boxes. Looking at Mbeumo next, who's on the bench, and he's in for game week 6. I wanted to have Mbeumo win anyway, and this just having him in now reduces the risk of him rising in price and me being outpriced by him. So I could have gone for somebody else, 100%. I could have gone for a midfield 5 for the next 2 game weeks, but I don't want to be doing that. I don't want to have that risk of getting outpriced. So Mbeumo win now. Could he return against City? Maybe. Could he return against Spurs? Maybe. And he might start one of those 2 games for me. Who knows? But game week 6 onwards is when I want Mbeumo for, which is why I've got him in from the offset, so that I can easily start him if I want to, but chances are I won't, and he'll just come in from game week 6. So that is the midfield 5, the 4 that are in the starting 11, the one that's on the bench. Let's now move on to the attack, and we can see a little bit of a differential that I do have in there. So now looking at the forward line, and honestly, I think this is probably the strongest forward line for the next at least 2 weeks, maybe a little bit longer. Don't quote me on that, but starting off with Haaland, at home to Brentford this week, then Arsenal the week after isn't the best fixture, but then Newcastle the week after that, who haven't been great defensively, and then from game week 7, City's fixtures get really nice again. Haaland, I'm very happy having. I think he gets returns this week against Brentford, 100%. Against Arsenal, maybe it's just a 0-0 game. Who knows, but even then, I wouldn't be too bothered about that if he does blank. Game week 6 against Newcastle, I see returns there, and then after that, I see returns as well. So, more than happy to go with Haaland. 41 points so far this season. I feel like there's a lot more in him. I can see him being on track for probably a 40-goal season as it stands, which is, one goal a game in the next 35. I can 100% see that, if not more. So, more than happy to go with Haaland in this wildcard draft and stick with him for the rest of the season. Moving on to João Pedro next, and this was a toss-up between João Pedro or Danny Welbeck. And looking back at it, Welbeck probably will be a better shout for this week. But then for future weeks, I do think Pedro is the better option. So I've gone with Pedro. I think he will definitely get minutes against Ipswich. Maybe not the full 90 like he has been getting, only because he's been on international break and he's on his way back at the minute. So will he start the game? I can see him starting. Will he get the full 90? No, I can see him probably getting subbed in the 70th minute maybe. But that's still more than enough time for him to get a goal or 2. And he's going to be that penalty taker, we know that. So more than happy having João Pedro in this starting 11. And even if he doesn't start, he'll come off the bench at some point. There's no doubt about that. So for this game week, it's a little bit more risky. But from game week 5, he's going to be locked on to start. So there's no complaints there. So I think he'll start in from game week 5 onwards, 100% locked on to start. Game week 4, maybe not. So if you are looking at somebody who's locked on to start in game week 4, go for Welbeck. But if you're not too bothered about them being a locked on start, João Pedro is the one to go for future games. And then looking at the little bit of a differential in this front line, and it is Nicholas Jackson from Chelsea. Chelsea's fixtures over the next 3 or 4 are really nice. And I can't afford Cole Palmer. Jackson has been playing majority of minutes. And I say majority of minutes. He's been playing, I think he played 90 in his last game and 80-something in game week 2. So he's getting quite a few minutes and he's getting a lot of returns as well. I think he's returned in every game so far, bar the City game in game week 1. So game week 2 he got returns, game week 3 he got returns. he's playing as that out-and-out striker as well, so I see him getting returns just from his positioning alone. So more than happy to go with Jackson, but there are other options which I will touch on a little bit later or soon that I would like to go for. But I don't think Jackson is a bad shout for the next few game weeks. Away against Bournemouth could be a little bit more of a tricky game for Chelsea, especially it being right after the international break. But then game week, I'm not actually too sure who they have in game weeks 5 and 6, but I know that they do have some decent fixtures. I know in game week 8 they have a Liverpool, which is when the fixtures seem to drop off a little bit for Chelsea, but the next, until game week 7, fixtures are really nice for Chelsea, so Jackson is a really good shout to go for. Now, looking at the overall team, what don't I like? The one thing I don't like is the lack of ability to get to Arsenal assets. So no Saka, can't really get to Havertz, can't really get to Gabriel, can't get to Raya, can't get to Saliba. So there is that risk that going into game week 6, having next to no Arsenal coverage in there is really risky. So I'm not a huge fan of that. What else don't I like? The triple up on Brighton, I'm not a huge fan on, mainly because from game week 6, the fixtures get a little bit more tricky for Brighton. So I would have to look at moving away from those Brighton assets. So, I do like the team, don't get me wrong, but there are a lot of room for improvements. And the next draft that I'm going to show you is one that I'm leaning towards a little bit more. I've not quite pulled the trigger on it yet, but I will get onto that draft now and show you why I like it a little bit more. So looking at the other wildcard draft that I am considering, and I'm not going to go through the entire team because some of the players are just the same, but I am going to touch on the players that have come in instead. So starting off in net, I've gone for Raya. The next two fixtures aren't great, but I can see save points in them. And then mainly from game week 6, the fixtures are incredibly nice for Arsenal and I see clean sheets in them. So having Raya in there is not a guaranteed clean sheet, but there is a better chance of a clean sheet. So it gets Arsenal defensive coverage in the ready for game week 6, which is why I like it a little bit more, if I'm being honest. Moving down to the defence, I have Robertson in there from Liverpool. Having him for the next 2 is perfect. And then in game week 6, it then allows me to just do a straight swap from Robertson to either Gabriel or Saliba. So again, gets me some more Arsenal defensive coverage in there, ready for the nice fixture run that Arsenal do have from game week 6. So that's another thing that I like about this draft. If I look at the bench as well, I do have Konsa on there at the minute for that Villa coverage, which is great from game week 6. He can come on instead of Dunk when Dunk's fixtures get a little bit tough. Villa's get really nice still. So again, I like that rotation of the 4.5s in this draft, whereas in the other draft, don't really have that. I have Pedro Porro on the bench, but his fixtures aren't the best long term. Looking at midfield, the only real change that I've made here is Bowen for Mbeumo. And the reason behind that is for the next 2 game weeks, I could actually start Bowen. So away against Fulham, and then they're either away or at home to Chelsea. I'm not too sure, but they've got Chelsea in game week 5. So Bowen can start in both of those games, and I can probably see him getting a return in both of them. And then from game week 6, I can easily do a swap from Bowen to Mbeumo, which then frees up a little bit of funds for me to move elsewhere as well. So that's another thing that I like about this draft. It doesn't have to be Bowen. It could literally be anybody. It could be, I don't know off the top of my head, it could be a Maddison, but against Arsenal, I don't really want Maddison. But again, it could be anybody in that price range of 7.57 million, so that you can easily swap to Mbeumo in game week 6. And then the only other change is Vissa on the bench. Vissa mainly there for game week 6, but then that's not having to use a transfer, and he can just come straight into the starting 11, probably instead of Minte. Keep João Pedro in there, but then from game week 6, Vissa in there for Minte. Don't have to be wasting a transfer then. So that is the second wildcard draft. And I know that's only briefly touching on it, but I do like that a lot more, only because it gives me a lot more options transfer-wise for Game Week 6 to get Arsenal assets in there. So I want your thoughts in the comments about that. Which one of those two drafts do you like more? Was it the first one that I've been through or this one? And what changes do you think that desperately need to be made for it to be a perfect wildcard 4 draft? So there we have it, guys. Those were the two wildcard drafts that I am between for Game Week 4. So as always, I want your thoughts in the comments. First of all, what changes do you think need to be made from both of those drafts to make it the perfect Game Week 4 draft? And I also want to know, are you wildcarding in Game Week 4? And what players are essential in your wildcard teams? As always, if you did enjoy today's video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you are new. And until next time, thank you for watching.